Not only is this a popular edit, but it's the perfect example of the powerful things you can do once you learn the basics of Photoshop: layers, selections, and masks. At its core, all you're doing is making a selection and applying a mask, both of which we covered in the tutorials in this series. Let's walk through a practical example. Here is a photo of a dog, but instead of the solid background, we want to put him in front of a mountain landscape at sunset. We'll start by making a selection of the dog. You could use the Quick Selection tool or the Select Subject command, both techniques that we covered in the tutorials in this series. This selection tells Photoshop that we want to keep the dog. Next, all you need to do is to create a mask that hides everything we didn't select, in this case, the background. So now the background is hidden by the mask, but we'll still need to replace it with something else. Just like we did in an earlier tutorial, we'll use the Place Embedded command to add another image to this project. The new image comes in on a separate layer above the photo, but we want this new layer to be the background, so we'll move it to the bottom of the stack. The order of layers in the Layers panel matters, and you can move layers up and down the stack depending on your design. Now you have a dog against a mountain landscape, and all you did was use the foundations of selections, layers, and masks to make it happen. This was easy, right? Like replacing the sky in this image, and adding shadows by using another image, or changing the background to a solid color and combining elements of a new image, as with these vibrant flowers here. Or you can even use the same image to improve on your own composition, as I did with this delicious dessert photo here. So let's recap. In essence, all you really do is just selecting the foreground elements in an image and using layer masks to hide the background. Finally, you bring another image into your project and place it at the bottom of the layer stack as the new background. Now is your turn. Practice these skills on your own images and give them an instant refresh or make them more fantastic.
Today we're going to show you how to create an animated GIF using Generative Fill backgrounds. We're going to start by going to Select Subject and then make this contract by about 10 pixels. Next, we're going to inverse our selection so it's selecting the background and click on Generative Fill. We're going to type in Splash, and here we can see our variations. We can see we have several different splash variations. I think this one looks absolutely incredible. Next, we're going to go ahead and type in Clouds in Sky and hit Generate. And these variations look absolutely stunning. Headphones in the sky, beautiful, nice and lightweight. In professional music studio with speakers and instruments and mixing board. And here we have our variations. This one looks absolutely incredible. Next, we're going to type in here, headphones smashing rocks, and hit enter. We want to show that these headphones are very durable. And these results look incredible. Look at that. Looks like the headphones are actually smashing these rocks. I love this one. Now, all of these options are included in the Properties window. So as I go through them, we can see all of our different variations here. And our goal is going to be creating an animated GIF using these variations. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and create 4 new layers. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, on this first layer, we're going to go to Image and then down to Apply Image and hit OK. It's going to take whatever it sees and put that on a new layer. Let's go ahead and make that invisible. Click on our Generative Fill and then choose our next option. I love this music studio. We're going to go back to our layer 2, Image, Apply Image. There we go. And then repeat this process just a couple of times. So we're going to go ahead and click on these clouds, layers, layer 3, Image, Apply Image. Fantastic. And then we're going to go all the way back down to our Generative Fill and we'll go to our beginning with our splash. And there we go, on layer 4, Image, Apply Image. So now we can see we have 4 different layers. Each of these has the content of different generations from our Generative Fill layer. So the first thing we're going to do is go to Window and then down to Timeline. And then right here, we want to make sure we click on Create Frame Animation and go ahead and click on Create Frame Animation. Here we can see our first frame is what we have visible. Let's click on a new frame and then make our other layer visible. And as you can see, it makes up the second frame. Let's click on one more frame. Let's make that visible. one more frame and make that invisible there. Each one of these frames now makes up our images that we were able to get from Generative Fill. Let's go ahead and shift click all of those, take our delay and put it to 0.5 seconds and hit play so we can see our preview of the animation. Looking really, really good. Now it's time to go ahead and save it out. To save an animated GIF, simply go to File, down to Export, and Save for Web. Up at the very top, you want to make sure you choose GIF or GIF, depending on how you want to say it. We're going to go ahead and resize our animation, our width and our height. We're just going to put our width at 800 pixels and hit Enter. And if I click on this preview icon, it'll automatically load in my preferred Internet Explorer. From here, all we have to do is hit Save. We'll just call this Headphones.
Filters often stylize, saturate, correct, or transform a photo with bolder effects to achieve a certain look. And Photoshop has a variety of filters that can help you enhance your photos. For example, you could add a creative filter to make your image look like an oil painting. But filters in Photoshop are used for so much more than just making your photo look more creative. In Photoshop, you can actually use filters to reproduce certain photography techniques like sharpening a photo to emphasize detail or adding a soft blur to create a dreamy mood. Take a look at this portrait, for example. Often, portrait photographers like to give a soft and dreamlike look to their images. But if you don't have the right light or gear to get that look in your camera, how you can improve your photos? Well, that's where Photoshop filters come in. You can add a blur filter to this photo, and then use a mask to keep some areas in focus. If you need a refresher on how layer masks work, take a look at our earlier tutorials. If you compare the two versions, you can see that the blur effect helps to soften the edges of the face and the background. This makes those areas recede while the subject's face stands out. With techniques like sharpening and blurring, and apply these effects to just part of a photo with the help of layer masks. Now is your turn. Practice these skills on your own photos. It all starts with one photograph.
And this super advanced tutorial is all about working with Adobe Photoshop and the new Generative Fill feature. In this tutorial, I want to demonstrate how to turn this photograph into a piece of art. Check this out. I've created a cartoon vector art, an oil painting, a pencil sketch, and a watercolor. I did this by using these expressions you see here as my prompts. So I'm using artistic terms as a prompt when creating a generative fill. But there's more to it. There's a super user tip and technique, and I'm about to show it to you now. Let's start here with my original image right here. Here it is. I'm now going to select the letter Q on my keyboard. Just like that. Notice that my original image is highlighted over here to the right. I'm in the quick mask mode. Aha! If I fill this area of my image, I can then fill it and create a mask. This is how we're going to do it, and watch very carefully. It's a bit complicated. I'm going to go right over here to my foreground color and tap once here. Notice my brightness value right here. I'm going to set this brightness value to 40. 40% will then create a 40% mask, an intensity mask that's going to be used for example, a watercolor that I'm going to create. So I want a 40% combination of my original image and a watercolor. Wow. I'm going to select OK. That's step number 1. Next, we'll go to the Edit menu and down to Fill. We're going to fill with the foreground color and select OK. So I've filled the entire image area with a 40% value, as you see here. That is a mask. I now can select the Q key again on my keyboard. We don't see the mask as a selection, but it's there. We know it's there because the Generative Fill taskbar has appeared here. It's allowing us to tap right in here. And now I'm going to type in the word watercolor. Now I select Generate. It's going to process this 40% mask of a combination of this image and a watercolor. The results will be really quite amazing, as you're going to see right here. Cool. So I'm using 40% for this. I can choose different percentages and get different results. So there's your tip and technique. In fact, a super user tip and technique for creating a watercolor. Try using some of the other prompts that I worked with, like pencil sketch, oil paint, and cartoon vector. Give this a try, have some fun, experiment. Remember, you could also run this process and check out the 3 different variations which will be created each time you do this. There you have it. Give it a try.
In this video, you will learn how to replace skies in Photoshop. To follow along, you can download the sample files from the Adobe page for this tutorial. These are the images. To replace the sky, we will use the blend if sliders found in the layer style dialog. Before we get into that, let's look at the RGB channels in the background image. I'll disable the sky layer, then I'll go into Window and Channels. In this panel, you will see the 3 channels that make up this image. The combination of light in the red, green, and blue channels make up all the colors that you see in this photo. You can use these channels to create a mask, or use their luminosity as a reference to hide or show pixels with the blend if command. Notice that the blue channel has more contrast between the sky and the foreground elements than the other channels. The sky is bright, almost white, and the foreground elements are dark. Keep this in mind because the dark and bright points in the blend if command will reference the brightness of this channel. Click on RGB and then go back into the layers panel, and we will start working on the new sky and the reflection on the water. Enable the sky layer, and from the toolbar select the rectangular marquee tool and click and drag down from the top left corner to select the sky. Make sure that the sky layer is active and click on the layer mask icon to hide the areas that were not selected. Then select the move tool and click and drag the sky layer up until it is about where the sky in the background is. Now create the layer that will become the reflection of the sky on the water. Duplicate the layer by pressing Ctrl J on Windows, Command J on the Mac. Then flip it upside down by pressing Ctrl T, Command T on the Mac to transform, and right click and select Flip Vertical. Then drag the inverted sky layer down until it lines up with the bottom of the original sky layer. Now let's work on hiding the sky from the background layer. First, drag the background layer above the 2 sky layers. Then, click on the FX icon from the Layers panel and select Blending Options to bring up the Layer Style window. From here, you can use the Blend If sliders to show or reveal pixels based on the image luminosity or the luminosity of each RGB channel. Remember that the blue channel has the strongest contrast between the sky and the foreground. The sky is almost white and the foreground elements are dark. So we will select blue from the dropdown. If you drag the white point to the left, you will hide the areas that were bright in the blue channel. Notice how the sky starts disappearing because it was bright in the blue channel and it reveals the image below. To create a smoother transition between visible and invisible pixels, you can hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on the white point to split it in half. Then, drag the left half further to the left to create a smoother transition. When you're happy with the blend, press OK. It is very important to note that Blend If is not just hiding blue objects in the photo. Blend If is hiding anything that is bright in the blue channel, which is why Blend If affected the buildings, the bridge, and the ice on the water. To bring back those areas and any other area that you want to keep, duplicate the background layer by pressing Ctrl J on Windows, Command J on the Mac. Then, remove the Blend If from this layer by right-clicking on the double square icon to the right of the layer and selecting Clear Layer Style. Then, from the toolbar, select the Quick Selection tool and select areas that you want to keep. You don't have to be precise. You can fine-tune later. In some areas, you will have to tap on the left bracket key to make the brush smaller and select the finer details. Make sure that you select the buildings reflected on the water because you don't want the clouds to go over them. Also, select the icy areas on the sides. When you're done, click on the layer mask icon to create a mask, which will keep only the areas that you selected and hide everything else. The only problem now is that the new sky is much darker than the original. The sky is what illuminates everything in the scene, and when you replace a sky, the new sky will probably not match the luminosity of your photo and you will need to adjust it. To do so, click on the top sky copy and from the new adjustment layer icon, select Levels. From the Properties panel, you can drag the black point to the right to brighten the new sky to match the brightness of the original sky. Then, you can use the midpoint slider to adjust the contrast. At this point, you can fine-tune the blend if, the layer mask, or the levels adjustment to get a better result. Now that you know how to replace skies in Photoshop, go ahead and try this blend if technique on your photos.
I'm going to go ahead and open up this file here, and you're going to notice this is a file that I took, a prom picture that I took over the weekend, but I was excited about it. But when I got a little bit closer, I started noticing, it's not as sharp as I would want it to be. Guess what? I'm suffering from a little bit of camera shake here. So in images where you have a good enough ISO, right? You're not going to want to do this in high ISO image. You're not going to want to do this in super dark images. You're not going to want to do this with images that have a lot of grain. This is something that could help you quite a bit. So there are some parameters for it, but when it works, it's going to save your bacon. So right here under the filter menu, you now have an option to, under sharpen, you can go ahead and get rid of shake reduction, right? It's not necessarily blur. What it is it's pulling off a little bit of blur due to shake, due to slow shutter speeds, due to a moving hand. So you want to be able to kind of pull back some of that information and get back some sharpness. So you have the option right under the sharpen menu called shake reduction. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so we can see what we're dealing with. You'll notice that right off the bat, it uses this one section, right, this one grid, as to where it's going to say, hey, guess what? I want to remove some of the blur from that one area. You can decide where you want to pull that, right? You can decide that that's the area that you want to do, or you can use this blur estimation tool to kind of go over here to this one area and go, no, I want you to use this area as the estimation for getting rid of that shake. You'll notice that right off the bat, it knocks out a lot of that shake, and it shows you something called rendering a coarse preview. Remember, when you're doing any kind of blur removals, what it's going to do is it's going to do a little bit of sharpening. But that's sharp, so you'll notice that you can increase and decrease the bounds at which it uses to be able to trace that blur, but you also have the option to be able to smooth out any noise that's been introduced from this, from the result of what this does. So I can go ahead and I can smooth out the results here a little bit, and you'll notice that every time that you do that, it's going to re-render, and this bar over here is kind of moving that stuff out a little bit. You can also suppress any kind of artifacts that may appear at the process of this. So you'll see sometimes like some bigger blotches or dots. You can go ahead and move that by dragging this over to the right. You'll also notice that you have more than one blur estimation region. So I have, the first one that was created was this one that was in this section, and it has a pin. That's that first one that's here. The second one that was created was this one, and it shows up as number 2. And you can continue to add these estimation regions to be able to kind of increase the accuracy of this blur. Once this is done with its coarse preview, it's going to go ahead and build a little bit of a smoother preview, and you'll be able to see that this is going to take something that was a little bit blurry and really bring you. Now that that's complete, I'm going to go ahead and click on the OK button here. And now, just to show you just kind of how far we've gone, I'm going to go ahead and select all here. I'm going to copy it. Or actually, here, even better. I'll just go to Image, and I'll go to Duplicate. I'll make a copy of it, then I'll move it over to the right. I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to do a File, Revert. So now, take a look at this one section here. This is the before. This is the after. Now, probably hard to see, right? Side to side. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come over here, and I'm going to go to Window, Arrange, and I'm going to make a 2-up vertical, and then I'm going to go to Window, Arrange, Match All. So you're looking at the exact same section. That's before, that's after. It's a really, really good change. Now, I'm going to go over to this one section, and let's just say that I want to add a kind of a finishing touch here for this. I can go ahead and I can zoom out here. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this, and let's just go ahead and use one of the new options for a camera raw filter. I'll grab this here, and all I want to do is just kind of go over here to this noise, or to this details section. I'll go ahead and I'll do just a tad bit of noise reduction. I'm going to do a little bit of an exposure and just a little bit of vibrance. I'll go ahead and I'll click OK. And now, this is the before. This is our after. That for me is huge, because you can take something now that has a little bit of that blur, do it to your own hand. You're not going to take something that's completely fogged out and get detail in it.
In this video, I'm going to show you how you can easily stitch together photos into a panorama using Photoshop's Photo Merge feature. I love how this process allows me to create wider and taller images than my camera can capture, as well as very high resolution images that I can print large. I'm starting here in Adobe Bridge. I'll also tell you how to start from within Lightroom and from within Photoshop. I'll merge these 7 photos of the mining pit in Butte, Montana. Notice that there's substantial overlap of content in the photos. As you're photographing, I recommend you overlap your frames 25 to 40%. Also, stand in one spot as you take your photos. Keep the focal length of your lens constant, meaning don't zoom in or out in between photos, and do your best to keep the camera level. A tripod makes this easier, but it's not required. I'll select my photos here in Bridge by clicking on the first and then holding the Shift key down as I click on the last. Next, I'll go to Tools, Photoshop, Photo Merge. Note that if you're working from Lightroom rather than Bridge, select your photos, right-click in one of them and choose Edit In, and then Merge to Panorama in Photoshop. If you're working instead from inside Photoshop, you can go to File, Automate, Photo Merge. All 3 options pass the files into this Photo Merge dialog, and you can see my files listed here. The first thing we'll do is choose a layout option. These are different approaches to aligning and distorting the photos to seamlessly fit them together. If you have a center subject in your scene and the scene is relatively flat, like a building, as you turn your camera to capture the side frames in your panorama, your camera is at an angle to your subject. The perspective option corrects your side photos for this perspective distortion. On the other hand, if your scene doesn't have a center subject, or it wraps around you all or part of the way, then this correction isn't needed, and cylindrical is a better option. Spherical maps the photos into a sphere and is often best for 360-degree panoramas. If it's not clear to me which option to use, I'll often choose Auto and let Photo Merge analyze my photos and choose the best method from these top 3. If I don't like the results, I'll experiment with the others. Now, collage and reposition won't stretch or distort your photos, so you most likely won't get a seamless result. They're intended for creative collages. In this case, I'll choose cylindrical. I'll choose to blend the images together so that I don't see harsh edges between the photos. If I'm photographing with a wide-angle lens that darkens the corners of my photos, I'll remove these vignettes, and I'll also correct for any lens distortion. If in doubt, I would check these boxes. I'll hit OK, and let Photo Merge get started. Now you can merge a single vertical or horizontal strip of photos as I have here, or you can merge a whole matrix of photos. How many photos you can merge will be dependent on how large your files are and how much memory your computer has. In the Layers panel, each photo is being put on its own layer and then aligned and distorted as needed and then blended together. And as you can see, this really works amazingly well. I'm always impressed by this tool. Now I'm going to turn on each layer individually to show you what we're actually using from each photo. I'll Alt or Option click on the top layer eyeball here so that the others are turned off. So of this left photo, this is what we're actually using. This is determined by the layer mask that Photoshop built. Whatever's black on the mask is turned off, and whatever's white is turned on. Next, I'll Alt or Option click on the next one, and I'll continue down through the layers. Finally, I'll Alt or Option click again to turn them all back on. To see why these layer masks have been built, I'll disable this top one temporarily by Shift clicking on it. Notice that we see the entire left-hand photo sitting on top of the next one. There's a harsh edge because one is slightly darker than the other. By choosing the blending option in the photo merge dialog, Photoshop has determined where to make the split so that we can't see any fall off. I'll turn the layer mask back on by Shift clicking on it, but watch over here on the photo as that edge magically melts away. I want to give you a few more tips for photographing panoramas so that yours blend together as well as this one does. It's important to use manual focus rather than autofocus so that what you're focusing on doesn't shift between shots. Similarly, keep your depth of field or aperture constant as well as your exposure if possible. Shoot in manual exposure mode if you can. If not, use aperture priority. Finally, so that your white balance doesn't shift between shots, don't use auto white balance mode. Okay, to finish this image, I'll crop in on the top and sides, and then so that I have as much water as possible, I'll fill in this bottom gap with more water. I'll grab the crop tool, and then I'll click and drag in from the edges, and then I'll click on the check mark to complete the crop. Now my plan is to use Content Aware Fill to fill in the water. I need to work on all of the layers together, so I'll flatten them into one layer by going to Layer, Flatten Image. Next, I'll select this gap by using the Magic Wand tool. I'll click in the gap, and we can see the selection made here. For Content Aware Fill, I need to expand the selection just a little bit into the water. So I'll go up to Select, Modify, Expand, and I'll expand by 5 pixels. I'll say OK, and now I'm ready to use Content Aware Fill. I'll go up to Edit, Fill, and from the drop-down here, I'll choose Content Aware, and I'll say OK. Photoshop analyzes the surrounding area and fills in the selection to match it. If I deselect this area by going up to Select, Deselect, you can see that again, it's done a wonderful job. After creating a panorama, I would then continue to develop it. For example, I'd brighten the left side of this image. I could do it here in Photoshop, or I could save this and go to Lightroom to complete the work. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this video on using PhotoMerge to easily create panoramas.
One of the final touches in any compositing project is to create a unified look and feel so that the color and tonal qualities will match among the different image elements. In this tutorial, we'll explore some ways to create a unifying color treatment for a composite in Photoshop CC. For this project, we have a science fiction composite, and I want to try out an overall cool and blue look for the entire scene. First, I'm going to create a layer with the average color of the blue background. This can sometimes be an effective way to create a unifying color treatment based on colors that are present in a single layer. I'm going to turn off the visibility of the robot and astronaut group by clicking on its eye icon, and I'll just click on this triangle here to close the group. My background layer is active, so I'll come up to the Layer menu and choose New, Layer via Copy. Command-J or Control-J is the very useful shortcut for that. Next, I'll click on the Desert City layer in the Layers panel, and I'll drag that down underneath the new Copy layer. I'll click on that background copy layer to make it active, and I'll come up to the Filter menu and choose Blur Average. So this takes all the colors on that layer and it averages them into a single color. To blend this in, I'll open up the Blend Mode menu at the top of the Layers panel, come down to almost the bottom, and I'll choose Color. So that looks good, but the tint is a single color, and few things in life, even on other planets, are a single color. So I'm going to come up and lower the opacity for that layer to about 55%. I think that looks pretty good. The other thing I'm noticing if I turn this layer off and then on again is that I'm losing some of this nice rich blue saturation in that motion blur. So I can fix that by coming up to the Layer menu and choosing Create Clipping Mask. Now what this will do is it will clip or attach this active layer to the layer immediately underneath so that whatever this layer does, it's only affecting this underlying layer and not the other layers under that. So that looks good. Let's move on to the robot and the astronaut. I'm going to click on their eye icon to make them visible and then click on the group name to make it active. I'm going to come over to the eyedropper tool and I'm going to select and sample the color right next to the robot's eye. Now what I want to do with this sampled color is I want to turn it into a color fill layer, but I also want to use the same layer clipping mask technique that I used on that color average layer a moment ago. I can do this with a really useful shortcut. I'm going to hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on Windows, and I will come and click on the Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer button down here at the bottom of the Layers panel. I'm going to choose Solid Color, and that Option or Alt key shortcut is what prompts this dialog to pop up, where we find this very useful checkbox to use previous layer to create a clipping mask. I'll choose that and click OK, and then I'll click OK in the color picker. And you can see that this new color fill layer is indeed only affecting the robot and the astronaut. Let's open up the Layer Blend Mode menu in the Layers panel, and we'll come down, and I can choose either Hue or Color. Each of these has a different effect. The color mode is a lot more pronounced and affects more of the image. Hue, on the other hand, is more subtle and will not tint areas where there was little or no color saturation to begin with, such as the light areas on the astronaut and the robot. For this scene, I like Hue, so I'm going to choose that. Next, I'm going to edit this layer mask for this fill layer. So I'll click on it to make it active. I'm going to come and get the Brush tool. Down at the bottom of the tool panel, I see that black is my foreground color. So I'm just going to start painting on that layer mask to bring in the red light and the glow of the light on the front of the astronaut's suit and also on the eye of the robot. And finally, I'm going to lower the opacity of my brush down to about 60%, and I'll paint on the astronaut's face just to bring in some nice color so she looks a little bit more healthy there inside of her suit. So you can see that creating a color treatment for a composite project can really tie everything together so that it works as a unified image. It's a final dash of image seasoning that is an essential part of creating successful composites from multiple photos.